Good evening, and tonight I'd like to talk to you about another medieval invention I've also tried to recreate, but this time not a musical instrument, but these things, spectacles. Yes, this is my attempt to recreate a pair of medieval spectacles using nothing but cardboard and bits of perspex. Not entirely successfully, but if you can see that there, that gives you some idea of how they were constructed. Yeah, they were made in two halves and with a hinge, a rivet. The frames were originally made of ivory. The lenses obviously were glass because they didn't have plastic back then, and through them there was a rivet, and you could open them out and close them up. And unfortunately, this being my first attempt, I haven't been able to replicate that. And you put them on your nose and perch them on your nose like this and peer through them. So there you go. They were invented circa in about 1286, the last quarter of the 13th century. Now, they've been associated and credited with two Dominican friars. One was Alessandro della Spina and the other was Salvino del Almati. Now, it seems, however, that Della Spina didn't actually make them. What he did is he seems to have seen them being made, and then made a copy himself, and he popularised them. The Arabs have been making lenses since the 11th century, and there's been work done which suggests that the Vikings also knew about them, and a series of civilizations going back to ancient antiquity also knew about lenses and that you could use them. And the evidence so far is that lenses in ancient history were used to create fire by concentrating the sun's rays. However, somebody wrote a big book a little while ago, which was reviewed by the 14 Times, which said, no, this isn't different. This wasn't the case. They were used for magnifying images, like we use lenses. I don't know whether that's true or not, but anyway. The first Latin writer on lenses was Robert Grosseteste, who was the great Bishop of Lincoln. He was an immense polymath in the 13th century, and he is credited as being one of the founders of modern Western experimental science. And he started off by examining the way light and images were refracted in spherical urine flasks, because medieval medicine was all about peering at your wee and then seeing if you had a disease. Not, I think, possibly an important part of medicine, but not the whole part. Anyway, he used these spherical urine glasses and says, well, look, you can use them. You can use glass and the distortions in glass to make small things appear larger and distant things appear much nearer to you. It was, this idea was taken over by Roger Bacon. He was another great friar and scientific writer in the 13th century, and he's in his Opus Majus, or Opus Maius. He says, oh, well, these lenses ought to be used. We ought to be using lenses. We ought to be using convex lenses for reading aids and to make things appear larger. And he actually specifically recommends them to correct long-sightedness, which is where you're able to see things in the distance much clearer than close up. And he says, well, we ought to be using convex lenses to correct this defect rather than the short-sightedness, which is, I think, a different approach from that used today. Anyway, Jean de Meun, or Meun, I'm sorry, you're going to have to forgive my French. He refers to the new scientific experiments in his magnificent octopus, as Baldric says, the Roman de la Rose, and he says, one may learn the cause why mirrors through some subtle laws have power to objects seen therein, atoms minute or letter thin, to give appearance of fair size, though naked unassisted eyes can scarce perceive them, grains of sand, seem stone when through these glasses scanned. But to these matters blind affiance no man need give. They're proved by science. You know, I think this is an immensely fun bit of poetry, because it actually proves to you that in the Middle Ages people were interested in science. There was intellectual curiosity, at least in the in the Central and later Middle Ages, and of course people were there saying of science what they say now. No, no, you can do an experiment, you can prove it. No, it's scientific. It's an amazing, it's an attitude which you associate only with modern scientific technocratic society, but it's there. At least, it seems to be. Now, the earliest known specific term for glasses is in the supplementary regulations of the Guild of Crystal Workers in Venice in 1300, which called them roidi da oli, or discs for the eyes. Well, I suppose they are. The next year there is a reference to them as vitreus ab oculis ad legendum, glasses for the eyes for reading. References to them become increasingly common over the following decades. In 1322, one of the bishops bequeathed one pair of spectacles framed in silver gilt. So they're not cheap items. The first medical reference to them comes in 1363, when the great French surgeon Guy de Chauliac prescribed them as a cure for poor sight, but only if lotions and salves don't work. Now, this was it. The cure for bad sight before the invention of glasses, where you put lotions on them. Obviously, these don't work. See your optician. From then on, they were very common indeed. The great Italian poet and humanist Petrarch, in his Letter to Posterity, describes how old age forced him to use them. For a long time, I had very keen sight, which, contrary to my hopes, left me when I was over 60 years of age, so that to my annoyance I had to seek the help of spectacles. Well, unfortunately, some of us were considerably younger than 60 when we had to start using them, but there you go. Yeah, poor old Petrarch. And, but give insight for items like this. And here is one of the very earliest illustrations of a man reading using spectacles. Great, isn't it? As you can see, he has a very distinguished appearance with a bald head and beard. And I'm saying no more than that. Thank you for listening.